Hey guys, how are you doing? My name is Andrea Rivera and I'm gonna talk you guys about the Armero Catastrophe. The event that I'm going to present to you next is a volcanic eruption of the Andean volcano Nevado del Ruiz, which is currently considered one of the deadliest natural disasters of the 20th century. This event took place on November 14, 1985 in the Armero Valley, Colombia. The impact of this volcanic eruption was catastrophic. The most devastating part of the Nevado del Ruiz eruption was not from the explosion directly, but from the enormous amount of water that was released, since about 10% of the total ice volume was melted and sent down the mountain. That is approximately 43 million cubic meters of the volume of water that later on mixed with ash, sediment, rocks, and vegetation. Scientists claim that temperatures during the eruption exceeded 900 degrees Celsius on the surface, generating four lahars flows, as you can see here. Two of the lahars combined with each other and then buried the city of Armero. The hazard could not have been avoided, as volcanoes are an unpredictable threat. But on the other hand, could impacts have been avoided? That's the question that everyone asks. Since a few months before this catastrophic event, the warning signs of imminent danger that the Nevado del Ruiz was giving were ignored. On March 12, 1595, the first avalanche was registered with the destruction of land and property, but without loss of life, since it was not a populated area. 2.5 centuries later, in 1845, there was another avalanche that produced the first tragedy in which 1,000 people died. At the age of 140, the third recorded avalanche on November 13, 1985, and the second tragedy occurred in an populated area. The lack of foresight and disorganization of those in charge of the technical control of the volcano, the damage and lack of control of some of the devices, the certainty that the technicians had that something was going to happen soon were strongly criticized. The resistance of the majority of the population to abandon their assets acquired with so many years of effort and work, sometimes for generations, and leave them in the hands of potential looters who take advantage of emergency circumstances, also play an important role. Certain natural phenomena, as eruptions, tsunamis, hurricanes, avalanches, can never be fully anticipated, unfortunately, but some precautions can be learned. However, the gradual increase in the population generally poor in risk areas is difficult to control and makes prevention processes very difficult, even worse. So what's the hazard extreme? This hazard was undoubtedly extreme. Typical lahars contain approximately 40% of water and 60% of sediment, whereas the Nevado del Ruiz lahars contain it up to 50% water content. The increased water content led to a more fluid flow, making the lahar faster and more violent than a typical one. The lahar that hit Armero was about the consistency of wet concrete, plus all the objects it found on its passage. The lahars ranged from 2 to 5 meters deep, and its velocity was about 8 meters per second. This environmental hazard ended up with approximately 70% of population of the Armero Valley. So could the intensity of the hazards be attributed to global warming? In this case, we can see the intensity of this hazard has no connection with global warming. So what is the most important thing that I learned during this research? During this research, I learned that I learned to not underestimate the power of Mother Nature. And the scientists who are dedicated to investigate this type of environmental hazards. Even though the eruption of Nevado del Ruiz could not have been prevented, the loss of many lives may have been reduced if it wasn't for the lack of accountability, poor disaster planning, miscommunication, and negligence on behalf of the Colombia government that resulted in the death of over 20,000 people and the destruction of the entire town. Many signs predicted what was going to happen, and because of negligence coming from the authorities, coming recklessness, and their attachment to their possessions, they ignored the signs and stayed there and unfortunately died. Thank you very much for your attention. If you want to know more about this eruption, you can refer to this citation